So we're looking at a sample application. The name of this application is AppDev Android Status Bar Notifications Application. So we're running the Level 4 emulator, the Google API. Remember that the Android platform is the open source piece. There's also some Google pieces that are from the Google corporate libraries. We're running at 640 by 360 by 72 DPI. We're on a monitor. Most mobile phones would take this and instead of 72, they'd run 160 or 240 DPI. It'd be a whole lot different resolution, a lot smaller dots per inch. Okay, so next we're going to take a look at the application that utilizes status bar notifications. And here what we've done is to set up a table layout that contains 5 table rows. The first row has the value for the ticker text. And what that means is that here on the status bar, the first time that we call the notification, we'll see something scroll up the screen, and that's this value here called ticker text. So for example, if we had a Facebook friend request, it might look something like that. The application would throw this up on the status bar. We'll type it in. Whatever we type here will show up here in just a moment after we click on this button here. Now the number is the quantity of friend requests. The title. The content, so 3 names. And the ID. So the ID is an integer that we create. The first one will always, well, typically we would use a 0 and we could use a 1. Microsoft SQL Server Database has a column type for the primary key, auto identity field, and basically we're going to follow that same pattern here. So we'll hit send or status bar notification button, and we watch the top here. You have a new Facebook friend request. You have 3 of them. That's this piece here. The number 3 goes in the red little circle. If we drag this down, we could see the detail, Facebook friend request, and here's the actual content. So this is like an email subject line. This is like an email body of the message. So that's it. Now let's take a look at the code that makes this work. How do we have a button on the user interface that binds into the Java function? How does the Java function access the operating system to send this message on the top here for the status bar notification? So now let's flip back over into the Eclipse developer environment. And this is the application that we're currently running. So from the Project Explorer window, we're looking at this project, AppDev Android Status Bar Notifications Project. And here are the pieces that make it work. The SRC piece is all the Java stuff. The generated folder is all the bridging stuff between the markup language and Java. So under HTML, we would call JavaScript, and there's no need to bridge that. But with Android markup language and the Java raw code, there's a need for a bridge that goes between the two, and it provides pointers to objects in memory. Also, the Google APIs, the Android platform, we're running on Android 1.6 just to make this simple and backward compatible back to the Droid 1. And we see the Android.jar, this is the open source Java stuff, and maps.jar, this is the Google corporate stuff with some licensing into it, packaged into it. The resources folder is all the markup language, and we have main.xml, that's the user interface, and we have strings.xml, and that's the place where we store strings like the title for the application and so on. So let's look at these really quick. So under strings.xml, we've placed 3 asterisks just to modify it and make sure that this change actually arrives into the user interface. If we look at the folder for layout and main.xml, this is the Android markup language. That's kind of like an HTML language for building the user interface. So what happens here is that we have a table and many rows. We have 5 rows, 1 row per user interface thing. So we have the row number 1. We're displaying the number 1 in a text view. We're using density independent pixels to set padding around that number. And then we have an edit text. So each of the 5 edit text objects, ET1, ET2, 3, 4, and 5, are the way that we're passing parameters from the user interface over into the Java side. We have a button that's set up at the bottom, and the way that this button works is that it gets clicked on by the user, it gets responded to inside the Java code. The way that we respond to it is by writing code in the Java side that takes a handle to the ID and sets up the event binding for the onClick event through the onClick listener interface. So let's take a look at that. How does that work? So we have a button over on the markup language side, and how does it connect here to this class? Well, we implement what's called an onClick listener, and the definition of an onClick listener interface is that it has one or more functions, and in this case it has to at least have this one function called onClick. So the onClick function here is going to do all the heavy lifting to take 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 parameters from the user interface and send it to the operating system so that we can have an event notification display at the top of the screen. So when the onClick event starts, we'll say this text begin, and when it stops, we'll say this text end. And the way that it works is we create a new instance of a notification object. Now the pattern here is the same pattern that we also see under the GPS in the operating system, where we have a location object and a location manager object. Well, with notifications, we have a notification object and a notification manager object. So what happens is that the notification manager has a method called notify that allows us to send out a notification to the operating system, and it utilizes the integer value that we create. In this case, it could be a number 1. It's like the primary key in a SQL Server database table for each of the notifications, because we might want to come back a second or a third time and refresh the content of the detail, the body of the notification. So we can choose an icon from the folder inside our project. Let's go back to that. So under resources, we have all these things, and there are 3 graphic folders for high, medium, and low resolution, and there's a default file called icon.png, and we can use this icon for the status bar notification. So if we don't have any graphics while we're testing, debugging, developing, here's a free icon that we can use that comes with the template. It's a little Android man in a box. So we have the icon, so we set the ticker text equal to the first text box. We set the number, like the number of Facebook requests, 3. We take the integer parsed value out of the string inside the text box in text box number 2. Then we take that notification and we set the most recent content, the value, the most recent data for that. So that's coming from the title and the text fields, and once that's all set, we can send that out using the notification manager.notify method, and we pass in the ID. Remember, that's like a primary key, and we send in the actual details that we want to see happen at the top of the screen. So when we're working with status bar notifications under the Android operating system, there are basically 4 objects that we want to think about. First of all, there's this object called the notification manager, and we get a handle to this from the operating system. Now anytime that we create a notification, we create an instance of this object called a notification. So this is like a single item in a list, and the notification manager is almost like a container for each of these items. So the notification gets sent into the notification manager, which is the handle to the operating system that does all the stuff to put it at the top of the screen. Now within the context of the Android operating system, intents are used to communicate between all things. And in this example, we're using what's called a pending intent as a wrapper to set up some optional features for that intent. So these 4 objects are going to be used to set up our status bar notification, and we're going to trigger our notification by clicking on a button.